In proper response to the glaring, if not opaque, deficit of new myths, I got one. A new myth. I could say for our times, but I'm not sure which time zone in which you people are operating all the time. The new myth is like this. In another universe, they had a brand new mythical religion, church. And its name was, here it is, the full name now, in quotes. The full name of the church, the religion was, it's actually pretty simple. Now, in this mythical church, in this mythical universe, their main method seemed to be one that they called plain, P-L-A-I-N, think. I feel it incumbent, even just being a storyteller, to point out to you that plain think ran contrary to every temporary physical law that controlled that universe. I'm not sure if they told all the would-be neophytes or joiners uppers, but that's a fact. And this method, this approach of plain think, was first taught, first related to those injured creatures there, on the basis of pointing out that they, as contrary, obviously, to you people, but that these creatures were wont to describe and speak of reality in thing terms. No. And to counteract this normalcy, this new religion said, and again I'm quoting, this new religion said that, now I'm beginning to quote, even if you speak the thing, think the process. Now, you do understand that, don't you? That although the main method, as I described, was called plain think, this was I sort of backed up in the myth, which doesn't matter, because you cannot get severe you know what in a myth. It's only in a parking lot when you back up. Well, I guess it could happen in a myth, but by God, they should have a very plain, obvious sign saying that severe tire damage. But as sort of an approach, you might say, to the ability, to the method of plain think, was pointing out that which might be available for those who were just starting out pursuing this mythical religion, that even if you speak the thing, think the process, you understand that would be, if you're understanding any of this, that would be sort of a step toward the ability to plain think, so that, assuming that you weren't quite up to it, or you had a gamey leg for the week, and that you weren't really fully prepared to plain think, then even at those times, through no fault of your own, that you might be speaking the thing. Or it could be that circumstances were such that there you are around other normal people, and that you had to go ahead rather than to cause an upset, that you went ahead and you spoke the thing, even if you had to do that, or even if you did it accidentally, even if you were too weak to do otherwise, but even if you did it simply to be more efficient in the city. There's no reason, this method says, for you not to simultaneously, coevally, even at the same time, while you're speaking the thing, is to think the process. Who's going to know? At least any of you think that you're still missing it all. We can make it plainer than all of this, can't we? All right, what this means, if I am interpreting this myth correctly, and of course its contents, is that to think the process is you make the act, whatever is involved. You make the action. You make the process the subject and not the actor. Now, come on. Anybody can understand that. Well, in that universe, they can. Before I explain it even more plainly, let's see if we can't. We'll back up again. Maybe this will even make it plainer. I'll go ahead and do them both at once. It would be quite appropriate, says this myth, to go ahead, if you could do so, and actually while you're speaking, it would be appropriate. Now, it might not be appropriate for the circumstance, but if you were able to do it personally, it would be appropriate to go ahead and be able to speak the process instead of speak the thing. Like this. Just when some of you are looking off very strangely, like the IRS had come to audit your brain, your books. It's to turn the action, the process, the act itself into the subject, as opposed to what would be normal even in that universe of the actor being the subject, because as we all know, and I'm going to tell you it applies, it is somewhat applicable even to this mythical universe that I'm referring to. To make the actor the subject, what you're dealing with, whenever you're dealing with an actor, you're dealing with a self-referring system. All actors refer to themselves. How can you act? You have to be aware of the fact you're acting. Yes, but I'm not an actor, I'm an everyday person. Give me a break. Just because you're not a member of equity. So it would go like this. If circumstances would allow it, if circumstances would not prove less than profitable for you to do this, it would be not untoward if to personally go ahead and even speak the process instead of speak the thing. Such as, instead of saying, I want to get out of here, say, a sudden exit seems appropriate. Of course, if this were not a mythical universe I'm speaking of, and if I had ordinary people, for whatever strange reason, if they had their shoes and sneakers nailed to the floor and couldn't leave and they were listening to this, what's the best they could make out of it? What's the most charitable response they might have to this stuff would be like, what a bunch of rhetorical prestidigitation. Even from a guy who used to, you remember, confuse his profession with magician and mortician. Because one thing about being a mortician and working there, you get a lot of free clothes. The only thing is, when you put on the coat, you can finally go. May I suggest, though, this is more than rhetorical play. Because, as I assume that you hear, unless you were dumb enough, which we don't need anybody any dumber than we already are collectively. In other words, unless you were just ordinary, you do understand that normally, under city secondary conditions, you would not be operating at the most efficient level for you individually if you continually turned the action itself into the subject. You could pull it off, but I'm not going to stop and go through. You could even use it as a method to remind you how dumb you were, to remind you where you were, to remind you which way is north. But it would not necessarily be proper to constantly take the action itself instead of the self-referring actor, namely That's you I'm pointing at, not me. To continually say such things as, boy, am I hungry, is to say something like, satiating the appetite at this particular time could prove promising. That is not necessarily the way to blend in with ordinary society. But again, at least you take, if you're ordinary, we got some ordinary people that showed up, at least you take it as being some sort of trick internally, here. If you've got any chance of being a subversive revolutionist in your own nervous system in your own lifetime, you will now understand that there is a quite solid material basis for me describing the old side of the thinking and a new neural building site. They go on simultaneously. Just because you go and start building at a new location, just because you start building, God, not metaphor time, a new house, while it's being constructed, you don't go and leave your old house. You're not that dumb. You don't go out there and camp waiting for them to finish, especially if you've got any knowledge at all about the lifestyle of carpenters and plumbers and roofers. You stay in your old house. You keep them both. Your old intelligence, ordinary intelligence, can go ahead and speak the thing. Ordinary intelligence can say, I don't like this. I don't like this kind of activity. I want to get out of here. It could say that, and you could be, that is, it could be saying the thing, because the thing it is doing, no matter what seems to be the subject of it, the sentence, what appears to be the subject of the verbal intention, it is always, you recall this, you people pointed it out to me so clearly only a few days ago, that all secondary systems are self-referring. You remember, you pointed out, I tried to weasel out of it, but you pointed out that it was a law. It was an operational fact. It wasn't a theory. Wasn't some metaphorical gong show payoff. It's a fact that all secondary systems, that's the only way they can operate. That's the only way they can apparently present information is through self-referral. That's it. You can go off and worry about all you want to, but you can't get out of it. So what every old intelligence is saying, no matter what appeared to be the subject of the sentence, what appeared to be the subject of the verbal intention, it is going to be self-referral, self-referring. At a new building site is the purpose, the reality behind my relaying of their mythical description of the method about even if you speak the thing, that is, the self-referring system, that is, hey, I want to get out of here. See, that's speak the thing. I want to get out of here. I'm sick of this. I'm hungry. Hey, I'm hot. Hey, I'm a decent person. Hey, don't get me mad. I don't have that much of a temper until smartasses like. All of that is speak the thing. And it might be appropriate, not necessarily the examples I gave, but it might be most efficient under ordinary conditions that you go ahead and speak the thing, that you say that which a self-referring system always must say, that you, the actor, are the subject of the verbal intent. You might go ahead and say that, but there is no cosmic law, not in this universe, that says you cannot, in the privacy of your own brain, while you're speaking the thing, is to think the process, is to take the process itself, that is the action, in a sense, I want to get out of here. The process, the act, is of course getting out of whatever the present three-dimensional spatial location is. But it's to take the process and to think the process, even while saying the thing. Do note that either way, the thinking the process while saying the thing, or being able to actually plain think, do note that both of these possibilities are three-dimensionally improper, and they are insulting to everyday polarization. As far as it being still the process, if you recall, that this religion as it describes it, this mythical religion, is, remember, plain think is their real, it's like the heart, the ritual, the mythology, the methodology of their religion. But even without yet any further exposition of what they may mean by plain think, because I bet you can guess some of it, but just for a second, let me point this out before we even get into that. And at first, you might think of plain think. You might try and perceive it as being, let us say, a five-dimensional perception of a four-dimensional reality. Our reality at its heightened depth and mental landscape as perceived by the best of ordinary minds, by the best of ordinary operations of any human at the old neural building site. That anything beyond that, plain think would be not unlike a five-dimensional perception of this four-dimensional landscape. But having said that, which I just did, but having just said that, one then might believe that is contrary to plain think, because that, if you were having a five-dimensional perception of a four-dimensional world, reality, then that would be more complex, not less complex, not plain. But may I encourage you that if you believe that, believe again. Because that is certainly sequentially, logically correct, which makes it a friggin' waste of time. Because it is far removed from plain think. Also, please note, before I go much further, I want to warn everyone, there is absolutely no way, so don't even try, there's no way to use this personally on your own nervous system. So don't anyone think that this is some kind of, this was some kind of metaphorical story that it was something you could use. So, don't even consider the possibility that in some way you could let your old mental structures go on and just do whatever they've been doing, and in some way that individually you might be able to think processes. So I didn't want to get anyone confused now, much less try and, or even inadvertently be any part to you harming yourself. Yeah. A certain specific aspect of what they say is plain think, rather than just try and describe it outright, because I don't think they ever have. That's why I haven't done it yet in 20 minutes. But there is an aspect of it that might shed some light upon the method of this great religion of, remember, it's actually pretty simple. The method of plain think. There is one, I'm not sure they have the word salient in that universe, but by God they should. There is one central requirement of plain think, and that is a knowledgeable disregard for conventional thinking. Without that, you do not have plain think. And from the aspect of having a knowledgeable disregard for conventional thinking, I might point out, from which comes the name of that mythical church, because from that, I suggest, at least in that universe, naturally arises the feeling of, it's actually pretty simple. As I was musing on this myth, driving over from the, what do they call it, where the priest and everybody lives? From the from the pastor's house. Huh? Somebody else gave me another suggestion, but it sounded too close to an orifice of the body, and I was afraid I misunderstood. Oh, rectory. Oh. I knew that religious people came from somewhere, but rectory, yeah. Well, at any rate, I assume you'll overlook this. I picked this up watching an evangelist on TV, some preacher, and I wanted to use it. While driving over to the meeting tonight, I was musing on. Here it is, 1090. And there is, I believe, a bestseller. At least I happened to read the review of it. At least the review of it happened to pass through. In it, well, anyway, it's just, you don't have to look far, but it's a great example. And this one even has a certain twist to it that the reviewer and, of course, the person involved didn't notice, but it's a woman, and it's this kind of self-revelation that sells, always. But in this one, the review says that the woman reveals that at the prim, pristine, otherwise decent age of 18, her mother reveals her own illegitimacy. That is, her mother's, not hers. But her mother admitted that she was illegitimate. And the woman says, immediately, set her then on the road to rum and ruin. Well, I said next year spin. This is not even parenthetical. I guess this is brackets inside parenthetical. But notice, if you don't think the world and the secondary universe of man expands and continues to connect and to change, notice, she's going to use this, as it turns out, as I said, I'm sort of quoting the review more or less, that was what went, oop, and led to her eventual alcoholism. But notice, what you're normally accustomed to would have been that there she was whistling along, getting ready for college or to go work at Kmart, and her mother says, come here, I want to tell you something, you're illegitimate. I mean, we've all heard that, but this one has kind of a, it's like almost another level. I mean, we're getting subtle. That she's all right, but her mother says, I got to tell you something, I'm illegitimate. And the woman goes to pieces. And here it is, 40 years later, and she's a recovering alcoholic, at least recovering enough to get out and promote her book. But notice, it's not that she's illegitimate. Her mother's illegitimate. And it just, all right. As all of you know by now, at least those of you who don't live in a rectory, as all of you know, this is part of the structure of the very cutting edge of the civilized world, the secondary world of man. If I must repeat, even in the world of myths, this is not an attack on psychology, on AA, on mothers, on legitimacy, on illegitimacy. But notice this is now a structured, integral part, an accepted part with civilized, sophisticated men and women to hear that this woman, who was fairly well known as it turned out, but anyway, has been a closet alcoholic for years and years and years and years and years. And so you wait for the rest. Like, well, a lot of people are. I've got an aunt that drinks, and I know that Elizabeth Taylor or the president's brother-in-law, priests become drunks. But so you wait for the story, and it's real quick. It doesn't take long. We say, well, when she was 18, just suddenly one day her mother says, by the way, you're a little bastardette. You're illegitimate. If she had said that, and you'd go, well, maybe you didn't pay attention, maybe you don't go read the book, but you do understand it is an explanation. It is part of the normal flow of the secondary world right off the tongue, right into your brain. You don't have to be a great follower of Freud. It's just simply now an accepted part, more or less. How might this be influenced, connected to, related to, and otherwise have anything whatsoever to do with us being here tonight and talking about PT? Plain think. All right, rather than the ordinary assumptions rather than the ordinary reactions, the transformation of energy that would go on. Plain think, in this regard, in my example, I hadn't left it. Plain think would disregard, knowledgeably, would disregard the causal, the apparent directive connections between this woman's mother's illegitimacy and her subsequent alcoholism. Plain think would knowledgeably disregard that. Not argue with it, notice. I said disregard, damn it. I didn't say argue. I didn't say point out its folly, because it has none. Point out that it's incorrect. It's not incorrect. But it would be a knowledgeable disregard for conventional thought, thinking. And conventional thinking is, you're the audience. Person comes out and says, I want to tell you, I have been an alcoholic for years. I've been taking drugs in secret. I know none of you. And you wait a second, and the person says, when I was 18, I have a clear blue sky, no preparation, never suspected my mother told me that she was illegitimate. Conventional thinking is that, well, that's some explanation. We don't have to get into trying to shave the ice down to fit an Italian on the streets for the card in New Orleans. You don't have to get it down to the level about, well, I agree with that. You don't have to personally agree with that in some way if you were questioned. It is part of the conventional thinking of the secondary world. Plain think would disregard that. Not right or wrong, it would just simply disregard that. What could be plainer than that? Because as you know, we're not going through this again. I get tired of dancing around and around and around when I don't even have my ballet shoes on. Don't write me. When the muse takes sippery, you do know that the explanation, well, I am going to do it a little bit, because I am not preaching to the converted, surely. The explanation, I became an alcoholic because of my mother's illegitimacy. Or if that seems a little too far removed, because of mine. I found out I was illegitimate. Or something worse. Whatever you consider worse, we've been through examples of that. Well, let's take that. That's a common one. I found out I was illegitimate. I found out that I didn't even have a father. My mother always told me up until I was 18 that my father was killed in the war. It turns out I didn't even have a father. She didn't even sure who it was. She slept with a whole bunch of guys. And I'm just a bastard. You do know that that kind of explanation is only fitting for the episodic consciousness of the secondary world of ordinary intelligence, because it will not hold up. The world is full of people who are bastards, literally. Are all of them alcoholics? No. Well, why is she an alcoholic? Why is this guy an alcoholic? Why did this guy, he was not only, or she was not only illegitimate, his mother was illegitimate, his father was illegitimate, his brothers and sisters were illegitimate, their dog was illegitimate, and his mother and father committed suicide in a very despicable manner that I won't go into. And this guy is now, look at him, the guy is now, I was going to say a psychiatrist, but let's pick something sane. The guy is now an accountant. The guy now, you could not spot him as being anything out of the ordinary. He could now be a poster boy for the bourgeoisie of life. Of course, nobody that understands anything, nobody that has a knowledgeable disregard for conventional thinking would try and deal with ordinary people about this, because you can't prove anything, but all of you by now do know that any explanation at the secondary level is no explanation. The only explanation is you've got to take it in the same way as the episodes of a TV show or the end of a movie, the end of a book. It just arbitrarily, in the same way your episodic consciousness and thinking works, it just gets to the point and it says, fini. The music swells up, it says, the end, they run the credits. And what are you going to do? You're going to stand in the theater and holler, hey, by God, that's not the end of that. What happened to the people after the movie is over? You never even think of that. Now, wait a minute, what do you mean they solve the murder and they kiss, and the boy gets girl back, and they're holding hands and walking down the lane. Wait a minute, run it. Wait, don't say the end. I want to know what happens next. What happens when they're 50 years old? You take it. You got no choice. If were it not for that, ordinary thinking could not even operate. So that is the appearance, the specious appearance in one's mind of periods that a sentence comes to an end. An explanation is given. The woman admits she is an alcoholic, a drug abuser, comma, because you know something else is coming, or it would not be out in the public marketplace. She would not be saying that. People do not stand up and say, I have been beating my wife for years, and I am a drunk, and I've been taking drugs. Everything I could get my damn hands on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that be the end. People do not stand up and say that. They say that, and we all know the whole dance of life, the whole dance in the city. Forget what George Gershwin did with killing us all with the sounds of traffic going through. He just stole the idea. It is orchestrated. And everyone understands. If somebody's going to stand up and say, I have been a horrible person, I am a drunk. You understand if they say, and I'm a drunk. Dramatic pause. You understand it is just a pause because there's a comma. They're not going to just say that and stop. Life does not work that way. That would be too close. I hate to get the horse before the duck, but now that'd be too close to plain think. Plain speak, at least. So he says, all right, I admit I have been a horrible person. I've just been a horrible, naughty little girl. Awful. And you people didn't know it. I was a drunk and taking drugs. Everyone understands there's a comma. Because I found out that I was illegitimate. And to varying degrees, whoever is dancing with this little episode will go, aw, or some people are going to go, oh, not that again. But the thing is, it is an explanation. But the thing is, if you have any subversive possibilities, you understand not right or wrong, no argument, no criticism. You understand that is no explanation whatsoever. None, 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 other than the fact that in the city, if you're going to live at that level, it explains anything as well as anything else. Plain think has a knowledgeable disregard for that. Plain think would not think in any way that I could plainly say, but I'll go ahead and say. As opposed to plain think, or as opposed to ordinary thought, hearing, well, I am a drunk and I've been taking drugs because just suddenly I found out at 18 my mother just said, come here, you're illegitimate. Well, do I have to tell you? Do I have to? No. Ordinary intelligence would more or less goes along with. You could have ordinary thinking that could hear this. And even though the majority, as I said now, it is part of the general flow of neural energy in the city, you will have some people in the city go, not that crap again. Or, fool on people. They got to start taking responsibility. Everybody writes a book. I think half of these people that write books and say, yes, I've been an alcoholic for years, I'm beginning to wonder whether some of those people are actually alcoholics. They just understand, if I wrote about how dull my life's been, nobody ever buys it. So I got to make up. So you'd have a few people doing that. As always, you've got the polarization of everything. Plain think would not be involved with either one. It would not be, or it would not be, well, yes, I understand that. That would certainly tend to lead one into self-destructive behavior such as alcoholism. Nor would plain think go, no, that's a bunch of crap. If plain think talked, as opposed to those two possibilities, plain think, let's say to this example, that yes, I've been an alcoholic and a drug abuser, but as I found out just unexpectedly, at 18 I found out I was illegitimate. Rather than taking that, rather than opposing that, plain think, if it talked, its response, that is what it thought about, would be more like, that's the way things are. Well, do note that this, what I'm referring to, or what the myth refers to as knowledgeable disregard, has nothing to do, is not some form of fatalism. Because that sort of thing, life has already let that seep out, become part at various times, various places, into the general neural wiring system of humanity. But there are people that still say such as that. Well, we're just all doomed. Or, everybody just lives by their genetics, and it doesn't matter what happens in life. And that's all the way from attempted, I guess something's still going on, religious structures, the idea of predestination that God's set everybody on one course or the other, all the way from that to simply that genes will out, that the environment means nothing, that you are destined to do, to think, to feel what you do. But that, and I'm not saying fatalism in a really negative way, but that is a form of fatalism in the broadest philosophical sense. And knowledgeable disregard for conventional thought has nothing to do with fatalism. Because this fatalism, all the way from people believing that the gods preordain who's going to do good, who's going to do bad, all the way from that to people just saying, look, we're all locked into the genetic code as much as animals are, and we have no more freedom than dogs do. That a dog's going to turn out and he's going to be a certain kind of combination, dogs, sweet peas, monks, friars. They're going to turn out to be, mathematically, if we had the full code, which of course I understand they're trying to work on, the mathematical code, that you would have some grasp of why this dog looks this way. All you got to do, or you look at the dog and even get into the DNA, this kind of fingerprinting, and they might be able to back it up the other way, and say, all right, we can tell you about how the dam and the sire looked. Or we can take this little sweet pea pod, and I can just about tell you how his mama and his daddy looked and what they did for a living. No. The color of their hair. Knowledgeable disregard for conventional thinking is not that, because neither one of those are correct. Those are simply ordinary mechanical polarizations. Not that they do not reflect some reality, because to holler that God's talking to you at night in the closet reflects some kind of reality. But insofar as it being a fatalism, insofar that an ordinary man at ordinary level could hear me talk tonight, let us say, and go, by God, I agree with that. I don't believe it's a myth. I think that's some kind of secret metaphorical message, and I agree. People got no freedom of will. An ordinary man does not understand that. An ordinary man does not even fully believe that. You know that. If you know anything, you know that. There are ordinary people around that say they believe that. They'll say that is part of their wiring system, part of their thinking, which I have no doubt it is. But it's simply a part. And it can be polarized instantaneously. It can be polarized instantaneously when somebody bumps into their car. Why don't you look where you're going, you damn old man? You shouldn't be driving at your age. We pop in and say, hey, that's the way life is. You can't help it. Hey, don't give me that crap now, man. Just hit my car. Well, why are you so mad? My whole family's been mad. My whole family's got a bad temper. Get out of here. I got to call the police. That is not some form of understanding. That would not be a knowledgeable disregard for conventional thinking. That would be a polarized, as always, as if there were an exception, a polarized belief in fatalism, just to make it simple. All of you, I'm sure, have some great suspicion. And since that's the case, I guess we can stop. Have some. All of you have some great suspicion of this. That it doesn't matter what you do, whatever it is you're doing, much less whatever it is you're thinking, unless you know what you're thinking. Now, I tried to expand the normal flow of that little line would go, I guess, it doesn't matter what you're doing, or it doesn't count, what you're doing, if you don't know what you're doing. It'd be like somebody accidentally building, putting in some shelves at their house, and just accidentally got them level. That somebody could just accidentally look under the hood and fool around and not know anything and just accidentally tune up their engine. Or a man just staying at a party, having a few drinks, and somebody says something about, well, God knows what's going to happen to the economy now that war is on the horizon. And this guy's had 2 or 3 drinks, just for God knows what reason, he says, yes, when the mind turns to war, the human spirit loses the concept of profit and loss. And let's say some of the people standing around go, wow, wow. And he didn't even remember it. It was just like, it was like he is a human example of that great old idea of enough monkeys with enough typewriters. And finally tapping out a James Joyce. That was dangerous. That makes you wonder, don't it? No, it don't. Shakespeare, that's the one they use, Shakespeare. That's getting too spooky to think about a bunch of monkeys might have written Ulysses. All right. Of course, they did. I'm sure he didn't answer. But you understand that ordinarily it would go like this, that it, if you don't know what you're doing, when you do something, if you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't count, was the point. And that's the way that I could extract a city truism or proverb from what I was pointing at beforehand and say, well, it doesn't count, whatever you've done. If it seemed to, fly, if your car does seem to run better, if the shelves did get up, in a sense, it doesn't really count if you didn't know what you were doing. But notice, I've tried to put a little twist on it in case you think I misspoke. And I said, not only doesn't it count whatever you're doing, much less what you're thinking, if you don't know what you're thinking. Boy, I'm glad I cleared that up. In other words, I tried to give you a potentially more complex version of it that, of course, sequentially will not fly with ordinary intelligence. That rather than saying, if you don't know what you're doing, then even if you do something correct, it doesn't really count. The version I was trying to get you to see, try and straighten it one more time more directly. That no matter even what you think, if you don't really know what you're thinking, it doesn't count in the revolutionist league. That, and of course, only you know. And of course, also, I say, yeah, of course, it's got to finally reach a time that you don't have any question, such as wanting to ask somebody else, like, some of the things I think I know, am I on the right track? Do I actually know them? The answer is right there. Because if you know something, you don't ask anybody. If you understand something, you don't ask anybody. I mean, it's not in question. It's not even in a revolutionary, well, sometimes even in a city sense, life is wired in such a way that if you actually know something, you're not even subject to routine, perhaps, under certain conditions, polarization, that is, of somebody even accusing you of not knowing. In other words, if there's something you know how to do, you don't even think about it, you know how to do it so well, and somebody comes up and says, I heard you could do so-and-so. And you go, yeah. And went, well, they described how you did it, and I don't think you can do it. Or now that I see you and I look at you, I can tell you're not the sort that would do it. Unless you had some particular reason, if you actually knew whatever it was they're talking about, that you understood how to do it. You understand, even at that kind of mechanical city level, you're not even inclined necessarily to get all polarized about it. That is, to even say, yeah, I can. So I try and think in a certain more manifold way that if you know what you're thinking, only then does it count. That is what I was trying to get you to perceive a difference between, no matter how intellectually based it seemed, the difference between what would ordinarily be referred to as fatalism and a knowledgeable disregard for conventional thought, because you have got to have the full knowledge, and forget education and facts and all that, but you've got to have a full knowledge of how things work. That is, you've got a full knowledge of what conventional thinking is, and of course, and that being the case, you've got a complete knowledge of what conventional thinking is about this area, and then, and only then, can you have a knowledgeable disregard for it. Not an opposition to it, not a criticism of it, and not some kind of wringing of the hands, whether it be positive or indifferent about, well, that's the way things are. Not that kind of fatalism, because that kind of fatalism, if you need some sort of litmus test, I was trying to show you again, would be that sort of people, that sort of nervous system under the name of a man or woman here and there are subject to polarization. That they will have to defend themselves, they can argue, their mind can be changed, they can decide there's more to know about it, that perhaps in this particular instance fatalism was not the order of the day, but in my case maybe it was. Knowledgeable disregard covers the full spectrum of possibilities of how things appear to be, how everyone says they are, and then how, if you've got people saying in general how things are, then of course at the very least, you've got a minority somewhere saying that is not the way things are. You've got to have a knowledge of all of that to be able to disregard it. You can't have an opinion about it. If there's any hesitation in your thinking, if there's any chink in your armor, that anyone, including you, could go, are you sure of that? And you have to go, forget it. You know, pack up your tent and go somewhere because the answer is there. Are you saying that you can completely disregard everybody else's opinion in this? Yeah. I mean, you're that sure about what you think and what you know. Yeah. Are you going to tell me there couldn't be some anomalous possibility? Or even somebody comes up with an example that you had never thought of and they say, what if that happened? Are you going to tell me then? And if you go, then you might as well catch a bus. There's your answer. You don't have to come ask somebody. You don't have to go find a high priest living in a low place up on a mountain or in a cave and say, sometimes I feel as though I am a highly enlightened and involved person. Maybe the guy goes, yeah, you look it to me. But then again, I wonder if everything I know is actually mine. Do I actually understand everything I know? I mean, you wasted a trip. I mean, unless you just want to hobby, unless you just want to go visit Tibet or Cleveland. You don't have to go, if you've got a question about it, there's your answer. And so you cannot, may I suggest, even if you were in this mythical universe, you could not be exercising directly plain think. Because to exercise plain think, you have got to be, as we started this paragraph so long ago, you have got to be able to exercise knowledgeable disregard for conventional thinking. And notice also in the definition, or the description, conventional thinking is not limited to any group of people, any philosophy, any race, any religion, any time. It doesn't matter. It's wherever your nervous system has been raised, wherever you, the little Homo sapien pea pod, wherever you are, whatever the conventional thinking is about anything. I mean, there's no sense going into examples, because if you go into examples and think examples as you think local reality has any potential bearing, any potential naysaying to universal reality, then you've missed it already. So it doesn't matter. You say, well, wait a minute, what sort of things? Anything. Well, what sort of times? Anytime. Well, what sort of ideas are we talking about? Any kind of ideas. Whatever the conventional thinking is what it is. And it doesn't matter what it is, but you've got to have a knowledge of what it is. You've got to have first, of course, a more universal knowledge of what thinking is, period, but then the conventional thinking about whatever the subject is, wherever you are, and then be able to have a knowledgeable disregard. Then you have set up the conditions wherein it might be possible, in this myth, of course, remember that, of plain think. Could anybody see any relationship to something else we were talking about recently about the maps? I'll admit metaphorical. I'd prefer mythical, since we started that tonight. But the idea of, in the ordinary secondary world, of shopping and secondary stuff, consider that all hyphenated or in quotations, of shopping for secondary stuff versus purchasing essential goods. You recall that, those of you who were here last time, having to do with what would be the absolute necessities for a primary existence, as opposed to that which is now at its own level essential, but it's actually not essential for existence, shopping. Of having fashionable clothes instead of, in addition to, just enough skins, rags, pieces of old canvas to keep you warm, or the lack of same to keep you cool. Can any of you see any relationship between shopping and secondary stuff versus the purchase, or even if its conditions were different, purchase / or the toil for essential goods? And what we're talking about, in that you could purchase, you could toil for essential ideas and information that might be available through plain think, or you could simply continue to go out shopping for the ordinarily available intellectual possessions. I must admit that was a somewhat highfalutin description of either plain thought, plain thinking, or conventional thinking. Except notice it requires two different, or it would require two different currencies. That stuff, secondary stuff, even though I know it apparently at the secondary level, that they still take, at least in our part of the world, they will take dollars, whether you're buying just essential clothes to keep you warm, or whether you're buying, shopping for fashionable duds, not just to stay warm, but something, by God, that does not make you look like a refugee from the rectory. The store will take money, whether you just want a basic, good old wool coat, or whether you turn around and say, I understand that London Fog is now making Bill Blass, or what. They'll take the same money, right? But when it comes to this, there's a different currency, because it requires no real valuable expenditure to acquire, to continue to shop for secondary ideas and information, conventional thinking. But it requires a different kind of currency to get more essential revolutionist information, to be able to think, to plain think. There is, at least metaphorically, a corollary between shopping for secondary stuff versus the purchase and our toil for primary essential goods, and plain think and conventional think. Now, I'm sure, or I feel certain that some of you may be thankful to know that we're about to run a tape so that I don't have to try and pursue that any further. I don't think we have enough aspirin to help some of you much further down that particular line. Well, how about a little wrap-up? Something else we were talking about the last few times. If you recall, the little operational fact that we were mentioning, that men do not actually fear the exotic, strange, religious, political beliefs of their neighbors. The initial fear is always the enthusiasm that his neighbor has, therefore. And I know it sounds strange because it is so unexpected. It is so, may I say, closer to plain think than ordinary expectations we're expecting, which of course is what makes them expectant. If you've got trouble with that, if that seems too cloudy, consider if the neighbors, this other group, let's take a religion, because men seem to continually fight over religion. And ordinary intelligence, that is conventional thinking, would tell you that anything I have said about it is actually the fear of their enthusiasm. Conventional thinking says that's just silly, at the very least, or else perhaps I've got some sort of ulterior motive that it's just not true. Consider this. We've got a group here, and their neighbors, pick religion, their neighbors began to worship the great God of pig lips. Now, is that exotic enough for you? I mean, no matter who the neighbor was we're starting with, Jews, Gentiles, Muslims, Buddhists, they find this group next, they look over the river, look over the boundary line, and this other group are now worshiping the great God of pig lips. Except they do so with no particular enthusiasm. That being the case, there is no care or concern. Explain that to me. Now, of course, I got a little laugh out of you. But it is not the difference. It is not the exotic nature. It is not the variation. It is not the conflict in other people. It is not simply the polarization of ideas in the secondary world. Conventional thought says it is. Conventional thinking cannot go anywhere else to say, well, why are the Protestants fighting the Catholics over here in Belfast? You know, spare me historical. At any rate, it comes out, well, there is a grave difference. We're going to have to go back. Let's even start with Henry and his troubles with Rome and him appointing himself the head of the church. And it all seems to be, or say, why are the Jews fighting the Muslims over there, the Arabs, blah, blah, blah. It gets into land, but then it'll finally get down always in today's secondary world to ideas. Well, this is an absolute, diametrically opposed set of religious beliefs, or it could be political beliefs, but religious beliefs, I like to go ahead and give everybody the potential red ass because it is so, what they call it, emotionally charged. And that conventional thinking will say, well, anything that you try to say otherwise is just incorrect to be charitable. Because they are fighting over basic ideas. We've got a group here that's worshiping Jehovah. Now, he's one God. I'm not getting into this. But there's people across the river there, they're worshiping some God named Allah. I mean, you got to expect trouble. And some of them, they say the holiest day is Tuesday. And this other group says the holiest day is not even a whole day, it's just between 2 and 4 on Friday. Well, what do you expect? And one of them says that we should be, having pictures of our God. Another one says, no pictures. No pictures, please, no pictures. Get the positive. You could say, what could be plainer? Back to what I asked you. You could have a neighbor with as different a set of religious or political, but religious is easier to say, beliefs, as long as they had no particular enthusiasm, and you could hear that they are worshiping, fill in a blank instead of the great God of pig lips, a God you never heard of. And maybe they give you a little information, and boy, it sure does sound different. And so, and you might even say, well, what kind of rituals? What do you guys do? And maybe what they describe, you never even thought, you never heard of anybody that did that. But they seem to do it with no particular enthusiasm. Nobody the hell cares. See, that's plain think. Of course, that's me doing it, and it's not really plain think anymore. But it's the sorts of things that I will normally try to say, all right, here it is, it's so subtle. It is so tricky. It is so dicey that ordinary intelligence can't see it. The reason it can't is plain think. Now, I'm going to have to think about that. Wait a minute, there's got to be a flaw in there somewhere. There's a flaw in everything somewhere. 2, conventional thinking. To plain think, there is no flaw. Because to plain think, now I'm really running it, but to plain think would be if somebody says, wait a minute, I'm sure there's a flaw. Plain think could absorb that. In other words, they wouldn't do it, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Plain think might go, okay, so what? They'd say, well, I got you. You say, okay. Plain think can take more abuse than Rocky Marciano. And I don't mean just because the man's dead. Plain think does not have a glass jaw. Plain think does not have rubber legs. Plain think is always in shape. No matter what you, in plain think, now that I started all this, would make the tar baby look like it was made out of Teflon. Plain think can absorb it all. Because while conventional thinking is saying, well, this caused that, and that's the explanation for it, and it can't go any further, because if somebody pushed it, or if it pushed itself and said, wait a minute, Now, if that's true, now wait 1 second, I got one more question. If you got one more question, the explanation is shot to hell. Because it does not explain anything. Plain think is something else.